as I hope most of you know, I'm Simon Bickerstaffe, and it will be my great pleasure and indeed honour to chat to one of the luminaries of the RSS tonight. As Matt has already mentioned to you, I am delighted to be playing the part of a really, really naff Michael Parkinson, but talking to my very good friend, a really, really brilliant Peter Parkinson. Good evening, Pete.
Good evening.
We're here to talk to you about the history that you've been writing of the RSS, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I understand that you would like to kick things off with a little poem.
Yes,
if I may, if you just sort of explain the context.
I will indeed.
And
yes.
all those kind of things, and then off you go.
Yeah. Can I explain to everybody? In my right ear, I get sounds of music from the Barmy Arms, which does take me back. And in fact, if I break out into a chorus of Hey Jude halfway through, you'll know we really are back. Anyway, to this poem, which is very appropriate to the times, and it's called Stop Worrying. Now, I only got this poem the other day. It's written by a very good friend of mine who lives on the Isle of Mull. And with luck, he'll be listening in or watching in tonight. Derek Crook was a cousin of John Crook, and he's a poet, amongst many, many other things. And I was chatting to him on the phone the other day, and we were saying about, how we're finding things. And I said, I find it a bit difficult walking. And he said, me too. He said, in fact, he said, I can now swim further than I can walk. And the poem I've got with the title Stop Worrying is about testing the waters, because he says there are no tourists there at the moment. He goes on the beach almost every day and swims. And this is it. You wade aggressively, waist high into water, clear and still as in a goldfish bowl. Both your feet go fly about as one of them scuddles on a rounded stone. Your useless arms wind slice. You know the weight of water means no bones will break. The worst will be a mouth of salt, a loss of dignity, a furtive spluttering look around to see who's noticed. You've stripped to shorts. You resign to man tits and sagging stomach. Yet you're worried about your dignity. Come on.
Bravo to Mr. Crook. All right, so first of all, we should observe we are 1 metre distance here among friends, so hopefully that's ticked a few boxes there. And we'll get to the history of the club just in a minute, Pete, but I thought I'd ask this. Here we are in the Mary Wallace Theatre, first time for a long time. What are your earliest memories of being in here?
My earliest memories, actually, were coming here to audition, I think in 1985 for a summer show. I think it was Romeo and Juliet. Prior to coming here, I'd done a number of years down at what was then called Group 64, which is now the Putney Players, not Putney Players, Putney Arts Centre. I'd also done one or two things at the Putney Players, but I always wanted to do Shakespeare, more of Shakespeare, and I'll come back on that a bit later when I'm asking the question. But I thought, I'll go down and audition for this summer show. And I felt pretty cocky because I'd never had very much difficulty getting into Shakespeare and playing in Shakespeare. And I walked into this place, and the queue to audition was outside the door, not the door into the auditorium, but actually the outside door into the street. And I thought, yeah, there are a lot of people. Never mind, I'll audition. I think I'll get through. So I auditioned. I didn't get selected, but I didn't worry too much about that. I certainly don't worry about it now, because I think it was Gerald Baker who said to me many years later, do you know, he said the night you came and auditioned for that summer show, there were two other newcomers there. One was me, he said, and the other was David Duff, and we all failed. And look at where we are now. So I felt much better for that. But in fact, I think in fact I must have made an impression somewhere, because the next show was Henry IV Part 1, and I was cast, and didn't look back after that.
And we had a bit of a natter a couple of weeks or so ago. You were telling me how you got into theatre and dram in the first place.
Yes, in fact, quite late in life, actually. I came very late in life to drama, like sex. But at school, I do remember playing in She Suits the Conquer when I was much younger. But I didn't get really involved very much in drama at school because my school was quite some way away, and I was more interested in sport. So that when it got into the sixth form, I was playing for the first rugby team, not being in school plays, which was a pity. I might have learned something because of in the same school we had Ian McKellen. So I did know him, of course.
Was he in the rugby team?
No, he was not in the. He was not. He was not in any team. He was absolutely focused on drama. That's what he did. That was his thing. He's a couple of years older than me. So I didn't do much drama at school, and nor did I when I started at university, nor indeed when I started work. But then in 1973, the Ministry of Defence decided to post me out to Cyprus. And we might talk a bit more about that, Simon, because I know you have an interest here too. And I'd only been there in the first week.
You're going off script, Pete.
Am I? Okay. Okay. Well, and a colleague of mine said, "Oh, I'm just going to take you somewhere." And I was new in the place. And we're walking across this parade ground, which you used to call Dodge City. And this chap came towards it. She said, "Oh, I'll introduce you to this chap. He's the headmaster of the secondary school here, English secondary school." And he came to me and he said, "Fortinbras!" I thought, "Oh, he must have got a summer cold or something." But in fact, he was directing the annual summer show, which was done of Shakespeare, which was done in a beautiful Roman amphitheatre at a place called Curium. If anybody's been to Cyprus, they will probably have visited Curium. Anyway, he signed me up. I didn't play Fortinbras. He actually promoted me to the part of the player King. But I was a real greenhorn, and I can still remember trembling because there I was standing in the wings of a Roman amphitheatre with something like 2,000 people out there, knowing that I was going to have to go on stage and perform, which actually is a pretty difficult part to play a king, where you've got to be overtly dramatic, as you know. So that was how I got started. It was pretty hair-raising to begin with. But then there was plenty of opportunity to do drama out there. As you would know, Simon, being with the services is wonderful. You can do anything. You
directed a show or two, didn't you?
I did, yes. I directed 2 Shakespeares in Curium. I directed Twelfth Night, and I also directed the Merry Wives of Windsor. Perhaps one of the most memorable things that I directed was Fiddler on the Roof, which we did for all the military staff. This was pretty soon after the Civil War there and the Turkish invasion. And we did Fiddler on the Roof actually on the in the Western Sovereign Base area. But a Greek Cypriot had seen this and said, "You must come and do this in the theatre in the park in Limassol." Incidentally, I only directed the staging. The bandmaster of the Royal Anglian Regiment looked after the music, and he got all the musicians. And his wife had been with the Welsh National Opera, so she took care of all the singing. Anyway, we said, "Okay, we'll take it down to Limassol," and we did Fiddler on the Roof down there in the park with all these Cypriots, many of them who were refugees from the north, and the place was awash with tears because Fiddler on the Roof has 2 themes which really struck right to the heart of how many of those Cypriots felt at the time.
Displacement.
One, they'd been displaced from their homes, and secondly, the problem of getting daughters married. So in many ways, that's one of the most memorable, dramatic occasions I have from Cyprus.
Because we were talking a couple of weeks ago, and it may be true that I have actually been to one of your plays, because I was in Cyprus in the early 70s. Obviously, I was far younger than you. I must have been about 5 years old, or was I 17? I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think we might have gone to see Twelfth Night. And certainly we would have been in the Officers' Club together, where they drank a particular kind of beer, didn't they?
Yes,
you know what that was called?
Keogh beer.
It was called Keogh beer. And I just happened to have some Keogh beer right here that I hunted around for decades after I left Cyprus, because if you don't know it, it is the absolute Shan's Blues. And this is for Pete, chilled for him tonight to while the evening away.
Great.
And just in case he feels on his own, of course, I've got one as well. Yeah, so Cyprus was
Takes me
through
back.
time for you. So from there, how did you end up here? You might have mentioned that a few minutes ago. But
Yeah.
why, were you living in Twickenham or the Richmond area? Or
No, well, in fact, when we came back from Cyprus, we were in the Feltham area. We did subsequently move to the Twickenham area. But as I say, when I got back, I met up with some of my colleagues from Cyprus, friends from Cyprus, who had joined Group 64, alias the Putney Arts Centre.
Yeah.
And so they dragged me along there. So that's how I started doing more and more drama down in Putney. And then I think I've explained how I eventually came to the RSS. And
we'll slam into that as we go through the question I've got here. So this is, of course, this is about to be section 1. It's going so well. The history of the RSS. Give us 1 or 2 sentences why you wanted to write.
Okay, right. First of all, I remember
1 or 2 sentences.
Difficult for me, but anyway, I used to work for Military Survey. I was a geographer with Military Survey, and we celebrated in the 1990s the 250th anniversary of the start of the Ordnance Survey, Military Survey. And of course, my boss knew that I was interested in history, and he signed me on board. And he said something to me, which I've always remembered, and I think it's very relevant to what I'm about to say now. He said, any organization or institution that's worth its salt must be conscious of its history. So I think that's one reason, I think, why I felt that I should do this. Now, I'm not aware of the fact that we have a wonderful archive here, for which we must thank Michael Walters, who many of you will remember. Michael Walters started putting together the archive many years ago in these enormous volumes. You've probably seen them in the office. You need a forklift truck to pick them up. Anyway, that got the archive going. So all the information is actually there. And so all I'm doing is distilling information from it to write this book. It is a book that I intend to get published. Not sure who will be publishing it yet, but it will be published. And the idea is that copies will go on sale, and any monies collected from selling the book will come to the RSS. I think the next thing I should mention is that what I'm very keen to do, and Simon's kind of hinted at this already, one thing I'm very keen to do is write not just about events, because events don't make books. What makes books are characters. And so within the framework of the book, within the structure of the book, as I go through in a very chronological way, I will pick up on certain key people, and I will write about them. And I've been picking up lots of information about them from various sources, from old newspaper reports, from talking to people like Simon Walters, who is probably let's say the longest standing, I won't say the oldest member, but the longest standing member of the RSS, and other people who give me lots and lots of information about characters. I will say it's a lot easier to write about people who are dead than people who are living. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to deal with the living when I get on to them, but I've come across so many fascinating characters. I guess some of them you've never even heard of. I certainly hadn't heard of them until I started putting together this book.
Well, tell me about that. So first beginnings, I think the date is 1934, is it?
1934.
What about giving us a sort of an idea of what was happening just before then, if you know it?
Okay, right.
What was going on such that a group of like-minded people decided to start a company?
Yes, okay. Well, of course, we all know from the photograph in the foyer here, the person who's credited with starting the RSS is Gladys Erickson. Gladys Erickson was a West Country woman who came up to London when she was in her 20s to teach elocution and English.
Are we in the 20s here?
She actually came in, she was 28 years old, so I think it would have been about 1930, something like 1930.
Okay. Yeah.
She met her husband, who was a Swedish businessman. They moved to Richmond. She was very keen on drama. When she'd been down in the West Country, she'd been a member of the Plymouth Shakespeare Society, and they still remember her. And she also joined the Plymouth Repertory Company for a while, and was indeed the only amateur with that company. This is before she came up to London. Well, she actually, with a group of people from an organization called the Q Theatre, nothing to do with Q, but they were based in Q, and it was really a drama school. And in fact, some amazing people actually passed through this drama school. One I know, whose signature I've actually found in the archive, is Gene Simmons. Another is Hattie Jakes, for example. And anyway, once she was ensconced with these people down at the Q Theatre, she was invited to do a production of a very little known Norwegian play called Love and Geography. I love the title, actually. I like the two themes, really appeal to me. One, love, the other being geography. And they did this up in Piccadilly. And it was a semi-professional thing. And they did this play. And then when they came back, somehow they thought, well, let's try and get a Shakespeare theatre in Richmond. And they did. A group of them got together. They discussed what they wanted to do. As far as they were concerned, the important thing was to do Shakespeare, but where? And they decided that they would like to do it in the open air, find an open air space. But the very first production, actually, which had been intended for the Terrace Gardens in Richmond, actually didn't happen there, simply because I think they all went off on their summer holidays, and when they came back, no point in doing it in the open air. And so the very, very first production, which was of Much Ado About Nothing, was in St. John's Church Hall in Richmond. And that was the very first production. And then the next production was the summer show in 1935, which was, I knew this would happen. I think it was Midsummer Night's Dream. It had to be Midsummer Night's Dream, I think. But of course, you might say, well, what were they doing in between times? Well, they formed a group, and they had meetings, they had discussion groups, they had debates about Shakespeare and stuff like this, much like our Monday evening events, I suppose. But for a long time, certainly up to the war, the only place they were really performing plays was the single open air show.
And that was summertime only, yeah?
That was it. That was always in the.
So
we're
talking before much in the way of lighting, before much. In the way of
well,
sound.
in fact, the very first one was done in the late afternoon because they had no lighting, and then they did bring in some very rudimentary lighting for some of the shows in the late 1930s and rudimentary sound. The sound certainly didn't work particularly well. People in the audience and the critics used to complain about this.
Still do.
No,
Other reasons.
But anyway, in those days, it was pretty dire. Yeah, I mean, they were really just getting out there on the greensward and doing Shakespeare. And I think, from what I read, they were very, very good at it.
So it was basically sort of once a year kind of thing in the summertime?
It was really once a year, yes, once a year.
And it was always a Shakespeare, hence the name.
It was always Shakespeare. They could sometimes be invited to take it on tour, and they went down. I know they did one performance down at Linstead Park, down in Kent, and the RSS turned up late. But as it had been raining for a while, the show had been delayed anyway, so it didn't matter that they turned up late. But they played there, and they had a very good audience. And well, you can read all about that in the book when the book is eventually published.
How did they get their membership? Was it membership, or was it just come one, come all, we're putting on a show?
Well, they had two kinds of members. They had acting members, and they had non-acting members, much as we do now. But they didn't have a huge membership.
Right.
But the membership began to grow. But I suppose the acting membership, even round about the First World War, Second World rather, was only about 40. And it's quite interesting, actually, because at the time there was a thing called the Thames Valley Theatre Guild, and they used to put on one-act play competitions and duologue competitions and stuff like this. But this theatre guild also encouraged all the various drama groups in the area, and there were many, a lot more than there are now, that they should share, and they could borrow personnel from other companies. And it would almost have been impossible, I think, for the RSS to have done some of their early summer shows, because they had casts of up to 80 or 90 people it would have been impossible to do it without bringing in people from outside.
Did they get good crowds? Good audiences?
Well, yes, they did. They get. I mean, we get very excited when we get 250 a night in the out there over 6 performances.
Yeah.
Well, that's 1,500 people. Some of those summer shows we're actually bringing in 6,000-7,000 people over the performances. Part of the problem, though, was that only some of them paid. They had seats which you could pay for, which were all grouped around the stage. And I can't remember how many of those there, but probably more than we have now. But then they had the strollers, the passers-by, who just happened to be in the terrace gardens. And so I think sometimes somebody tried to count them or make an assessment. But yeah, certainly they got very big audiences in those days.
So you mentioned money, then people paying, people not paying. How did we get the adequate funds to put on shows and things like that? Was it just?
Well, they didn't have any actually. It's astonishing. I mean, they had hardly any money at all.
Costumes.
I mean, you see, we're going to have an annex, I think, which covers financial matters. I've got to talk to Bernard about this. He's offered to do it. It's quite interesting to compare the way finances have grown, obviously. But I mean, the stage at the end of the year, the treasurers stand up and say, we have £22 1 6p in the bank. And these summer shows, when you had several thousand people there, you say, it's pretty good. We made a profit of £11 5s.
Wow, excellent. So where did they rehearse? In the
they rehearsed in people's private gardens and things like this. Yeah.
Interesting. So I know we've got some old pictures. You mentioned the archive. We've got some old pictures. What are the oldest pictures that we have? Have you seen them?
Oh, they are. We have some pictures going back to 1935.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, pretty much all the shows have been photographed.
Right.
Yes, I think I would go so far as to say every single major show, this production that's been done, has been photographed. And in fact, may I say, what I've got in mind at the moment, I've not actually spoken to the editor of Rumour yet, but I will do. I don't know which. I want photographs in the book, and I was thinking of popping 1 or 2 in, perhaps using Rumour, putting 1 or 2 in a month or something like that, and see if people say, yeah, we'd like that one, because there's the early photographs, black and white photographs, absolutely wonderful, particularly the ones taken in the 50s and 60s, really first-class photographs. I mean, I'm not casting any aspersions on Simone and all the photographs that we get now, which are excellent. And I certainly would want some photographs from recent shows, but boy, some of those photographs in the early shows are tremendous.
So you mentioned Gladys Erickson.
Yes.
What other characters and people have you dug up from those times?
Well, one person was Gwen Dimbleby, and that name will ring a bell. Gwen Dimbleby was the wife of Fred Dimbleby, who started a journalist who'd started the Richmond and Twickenham Times, and also, if you like, founded the Dimbleby Empire, which is still there. So she was a founder member. Yeah. I think that was quite helpful, actually, because we used to get an awful lot of acreage in the Richmond and Twickenham Times. Even the most minutest things that they did in the society. Somebody gave a little talk on mime or something, and there was the article in the Richmond and Twickenham Times. These days, we can't get any reviews in newspapers. But then there were also many more newspapers around. There was the Richmond and Twickenham Times. There was there's a Thames Valley Times. There was the Richmond Herald. And there was the Middlesex Chronicle. There was the Surrey Comet, and they all used to come to the shows, and they all used to provide reviews. And some of them would turn up for some of the evenings and report on talks and things like that.
So the thing I was asking you about earlier, the continuity, 1 show a year, that kind of thing. So you obviously had a lot of loyal people who were talking to each other regularly. They were obviously good chums and buddies and what have you. So you come to something called the Second World War. What sort of happened during that period?
Well, the Second World War, of course, theatres and cinemas were closed. In fact, it wasn't even possible to perform in the terrace gardens. The last show before the Second World War was in 1939, and then they managed to get a show they got 1 show in the Second World War in 1940, 42. When the Blitz was on, of course, there was no way in which they could do any shows. But they were very active. They tried to find places where people who had large private gardens in which they could perform. And these people had very influential contacts. People who did have some of the big houses in Richmond district with big gardens. So they certainly went and did some performances of plays or extracts of plays in people's gardens. But I think they did one summer show actually during the war, and they were planning to do one in 1944. But then, of course, that's when the Germans started using their doodlebugs, or as they were described in the papers at the time, the fly bombs. And of course, they were the things that that stopped. You know, once those started falling, then of course there was to be no summer show in 1944. In fact, one of the fly bombs actually dropped outside the theatre here and killed Frida Hamilton's father.
Goodness.
Yeah, she told me about. In fact, I do tell the story. She knows I've done this. She's quite happy. I do tell the story of all this of the bomb in the book, because I write about Frida. She's got someone who's got a long history here, and it's quite funny. She told me this very tragic story about how her father set off to work in the morning with his bike, and then they heard this big bang, and the mother knew what had happened. They went out from her house, and she talked a little bit, and then Frida said at the end, she said to me, you know, we never found the bike.
But so at the end of the war, do we still have the same group of close friends and buddies who are making things happen, picking
That's
up
right.
threads?
I think, in fact,
that must have been a difficult time.
It was, but at the same time, it was obviously after the war. It was a period of great hope. Of course, it was a period of austerity as well, much as we have now. But there was this great feeling that something was going to happen, something had to happen. And with the RSS, it was like that too, because they got somewhere to act where they could do indoor shows, and that was in Cardigan House,
which is
Cardigan House is there no longer. But at one time there were three wonderful 18th century villas in the area just north of the Petersham Road, actually on the Richmond Hill. One of these was Cardigan House, which was built in the 1790s by a printer publisher. A few years after he built it, it got badly damaged by fire, and but it was restored as to how it had been. But he didn't go back in there then. He actually rented it out to the Cardigan family, one of whom most notorious is the chap who led the charge of the Light Brigade, and that's why it was called Cardigan House in the end. And in fact, Cardigan House in 1950s was used by the British Legion, and the major in charge of the British Legion, who was a great fan of the RSS, and he offered them a space, a room. It was basically, I think it was a billiard room, really, a large billiard room. Some people say a dance room, where they could hold meetings. But they eventually started performing there, and built a small stage, had lights, and they did some wonderful, wonderful productions in that little theatre in Cardigan House. Unfortunately, it was a very small space, so the only people really who could attend were members. I think they couldn't get an audience above 60 people, something like that. And they were in Cardigan House, but it did mean that they could start doing 2 or 3 main productions a year in addition to the summer show. Yeah, because there was this great mania for doing theatre competitions, one-act shows, duologues, all that kind of stuff, all sorts of extra.
But no strolling foot traffic this time. Only people that actually paid money to come and watch.
Oh well, yes, simply because there wasn't the space, and in the end they were getting very, very happy in Cardigan House. But they were in there about 10 years, I think, and
up to the
Richmond Council, you know, which really has had a terrible record knocking down properties, and they decided they were going to demolish Cardigan House, which was the last of the three houses standing. There was Lansdowne House, Buccleuch House, and Cardigan House. Cardigan House was the only one left standing. And they demolished that in order to do the big new development that you see on the Petersham Road as you go out of Richmond, heading in the direction of Ham and Petersham and so on. And of course, what happened then was that the British Legion offered the RSS use of a space in the new build. There was a lecture hall in the basement of the new build, and that became Cardigan Hall, as opposed to Cardigan House. It can be very, very confusing. Yeah. And I think there are many people alive now who will still remember, who will have acted in that particular space. And they acted in there really until the late 1970s. It was never a popular space, I believe. For one thing, it felt like an underground car park, right. but it had lots of deficiencies. First of all, there was no storage facility, so they were storing a lot of their stuff, costumes in Teddington, props and things, I think in St. John's Hall, and so every time they wanted to mount a show, they had to drag all this stuff. It had a very poor stage. There was no parking, of course. You talk to Simon Walters, he says it was such a bore because you'd be trawling around Richmond to find somewhere to park, and then have a long walk to the theatre. Yeah. And of course, the other thing, which you can imagine, would have been terrible, no access to a bar. The British Legion had a bar there, but the RSS was not allowed to use it. It was British Legion members only. So no bar, no parking, no storage space, little theatre, a bit like not a particularly good space. But it came to the point where, in fact, the British Legion really needed the space pretty much permanently. Yeah. And of course, the one thing is, the RSS, certainly by the mid-1970s, knew full well what they really wanted was a home of their own.
Indeed. And enter, stage left, it would appear, a young lady called Mary Wallace.
Well, Mary Wallace hadn't quite appeared then, actually. And Mary Wallace, interestingly enough, I don't think actually contributed very much towards finding a new home. Mary Wallace joined, I think, in
late 50s.
I would think probably, no, it was in the early 1960s that Mary Wallace joined. Okay. Do you want me to talk about Mary Wallace first, or how we started looking for theatre?
How we started looking for the theatre.
Okay.
I thought
right. Okay. Well, certainly Mary Wallace was a member when they started looking.
So who were some of the people that were helping hunt down?
Well, one of the key people was Simon Walters, of course.
Indeed. Hello, Simon, if you're
tuning in. Yeah, Simon Walters was one of the key people, but there were others too, several other people as well. I forget names; they're all written down. But Simon is obviously one that he more or less chaired the committee, the subcommittee, to try and find a permanent home. And it wasn't easy. I mean, the other thing that was very annoying about Richmond, and this had been said all along, right from the 1930s, Richmond did not have a space for indoor theatre or indoor anything. They didn't have assembly rooms such as you have in Surbiton or in Feltham. There literally was no space in Richmond to hold plays.
But you mentioned there were lots of underground clubs right at the start. Where were they all?
Oh, they were dotted all over the National Physical Laboratory, Teddington Theatre Club, of course, but they weren't where they are now. Right. Q2 had got started.
So Cardigan House back then was the best we could find.
Cardigan was the best offer at the time, but it could never really be our home. Cardigan Hall, unsatisfactory, could never really be our home. I think come the mid-1970s, I think they must have realised, the RSS must have realised that their days were numbered in Cardigan Hall. And they really started.
Francis was telling me about somebody called Richards. Is it?
Oh, Peter Richards. He comes into it later on.
He comes in later, right?
Yeah, Peter only joined in 1970.
Right. Okay.
I've been talking to him. He lives in South Wales. He's given me a lot of useful information too. But they looked at one or two locations in Richmond. One was the old Gaumont Theatre, which was about to close. The Gaumont Theatre is now the Curzon in Water Lane, Water Street, Water Lane, whatever it's called. There was the Palm Hotel. I no idea where that was. Some people may remember. Ryde House in East Twickenham was another possibility. But then, as the 70s rolled on, the popular choice was going to be St. Luke's Old Church Hall. St. Luke's Church, of course, is in the Avenue in Kew. But the Old Church Hall was much closer towards where Kew Underground Railway Station is. And this hall was getting pretty disused, dilapidated, getting attacked a bit by vandals. St. Luke's Church wanted to do something more. They wanted to get rid of it. And of course, Simon Walters and his committee latched onto this. And we were moving very close to getting St. Luke's Church Hall, Old Church Hall. And they'd even drawn up plans about how it could be converted to a theatre and so on and so forth. The idea was that it should be rented, perhaps with a view in the future to buying it. And things all seemed to be going extremely well. And then, of course, a developer came in with big bucks, big money, wanted the site, knocked down the Old Church Hall in order to do buildings. And of course, as soon as big money came in, that was the end of the RSS aspirations there.
Okay.
But soon after that, over the horizon comes this place, the old Mission Hall.
And what state was the old Mission Hall in? And when are we talking? The
first mention linking the Richmond Shakespeare Society with the Mission Hall is sort of 1977, 1978. I found a reference in a local newspaper to that, but not an awful lot was happening. The place was in a very, very bad condition. The Mission Hall had been built in 1870 as a sort of religious place. They used to have hymn singing sessions there. Also, temperance meetings. Goodness knows what they do with Miriam and David's King. No wonder we've got ghosts in the theatre. They're probably objecting to David and Miriam's bar. What is booze doing? And this is for temperance. But yeah, we got. It was built in the 1870s. The cottage area, which is where we have the dressing room and so on, that was added much later in the 1890s and was used as a kind of Sunday school. It was used as a soup kitchen. In fact, during World War II, it was used by the National Savings to collect people's pennies. And then the other building, which is now gone completely, which is where the new foyer bar area is. If you look at the old, I've got old photographs, and I'll probably put one in the book actually, which shows exactly what it looked like. You know.
So you're saying this was the hall?
This was the hall.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and there was no direct connection between here and the next buildings?
Well, yes, you could connect. You could. I don't know how.
Was it a shared wall? Was it a party wall? Or?
Well, yeah, I'm sure that people. I've not asked this, but
Right.
I'm sure that yes, there are people. Simon Walters, for one,
Would know.
and others would certainly know.
Yeah.
There was obviously a connection between that cottage area and the hall here, and then this other building, old building, which had double doors. I think that was one of the ways in which they entered into the church, into the mission hall.
Yeah.
It was in a dreadful state. I've seen some photographs of it, but of course there are people who will remember what it was like. Totally dilapidated, leaky roof, smashed windows, rubbish all over the floor. Lots of rats, apparently. The rats were running around as well.
Goodness.
In a terrible condition. Yeah, the boatyard people were out the back, and up the side. I'm pointing here as where we have the workroom where we store our props.
The yard.
The workroom. Yeah. That building wasn't there, of course. That was all added later in the rebuild. But so the boatyard had the side of the building, you know, on the church side of the building, and also the area where they're more or less where they are at the present time. So yes, they were leasing that from the council, and of course that became one of the slightly sticky points when we were negotiating to get this place.
Okay, so back to this then. The thing that always sort of strikes me, this must have been just a mammoth undertaking to turn it from the shell, the hulk that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how long it took to put those bits on, but even just to do what we're doing here. Are these the original walls?
Yeah,
For example? Presumably they are.
Yes, they had to repoint, I think,
Yeah.
a lot of the walls.
The roof has always struck me as being sort of
That's
very traditional, but at the same time, I
I
presume
think
it's been
that's right.
reworked somehow.
It actually, I'm very fortunate. I've got a whole chapter actually, and the chapter is actually headed "The Greatest Achievement of All," because I think the refurbishment of this place is the greatest thing that the RSS has done. I would think probably it's the greatest thing that any amateur group has done within this area that I know of. I think it's an astounding achievement.
Yep.
And I can say this because I came later. Fortunately, Simon Walters has left a file several inches thick because he was the lead. I mean, his business, his career meant that he understood about building management and all this kind of thing. And so he was dealing with the council, which is not as easy. It was not as easy as you might think. He was dealing with architects. He was dealing with builders. He was dealing with Speyhawk, of course, who have their plaque in the entrance hall.
They do.
Tellings with the builders. He was doing all this kind of stuff. The members of the RSS accepted the job of clearing out, are we past the watershed, all the crap.
All the shite.
Yes, that's right. I think the decision was taken. I think they agreed this with Speyhawk and the builders. We would, I say we, the RSS would clear all the debris away and do a lot of stuff like that. So it became easier for the builders when they came in to do
this stuff. Yeah.
And they did it in 3 phases. The first phase was actually the hall. And that was done for about, I think, 15,000.
Which is effectively that wall.
Yeah.
To that
Which was done for about £15,000. And I think that also included the extension, which was done on the side there, where we have our workshop and where we keep the props and the costumes as well.
When are we talking now? I'm just trying to work out whether £15,000 is
we're talking
very large amount of money.
1980. The whole rebuild actually cost something like 105,000.
Was it 84 Speyhawk? Is that the foundation stone?
Yes, they're commemorated there. I'll come on to them in a minute. I'll try and be quick. Actually, I know I talk too much. But the building was done in 3 phases.
I'm so glad you do tonight, Peter.
The building was done in 3 phases. The first phase was doing the hall.
Yeah.
The second phase was restoring the cottages.
Yeah.
The third phase, effectively, was getting rid of the old building. In fact, the old building was used right at the beginning. They had a bar set up in there.
Right.
In fact, when Prince Charles opened the place, they had this thing which was
would
probably look like a cowshed.
Yeah.
The last thing to be built was the new foyer and the bar, and that was the most expensive bit.
Right.
That was the most expensive part of the build.
Mm-hmm.
The total build for the 3 phases then came to £105,000, and all that money had to be raised.
Yeah.
So I can sing the praises of Simon Walters with his professional expertise, which he used to great effect in getting us the building that we want. But there's one other person that I do have to mention, and that's Annie Keane. Again, I think many of you will remember Annie Keane. Wonderful lady. I knew her for a year or 2 before, but again, she was someone who died too young. But Annie's great role was as a fundraiser. Right? And she spearheaded the fundraising. And my goodness, did they raise money? I think by the time all the work was done, now somebody had come from the bequest of Mary Wallace had died in 1977, right. And she'd worked in the contracts department of Thames Television. And Thames Television, I think after she died, this is when we were still looking at St. Luke's Hall. The committee here had, I think John Shepherd was the chairman. I think he was the chairman then. Had intimated that we would probably rename the theatre after Mary Wallace. And Thames Television immediately came up and said they would put £1,000 into the pot. Right. And then it was also, they also said that they would accede to Mary Wallace's wish.
Even though it's some 7 years since her death, that's quite a...
No, well, no, she died in 77. And there was, we were looking at St. Luke's Hall in 1977,
right.
and we were looking at this place only a year or two after she died. But Thames Television also acceded to her wish that all her death benefits, if you like, the pension benefits, should be given to the RSS. And I think we've got about £15,000 from that. So if you like, that's about £16,000.
Right.
But it's still left one hell of a lot of money.
A big deal. Yeah.
And I, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact sum that was raised in fundraising, but it was most of the rest between that 16,000 and the 105,000. I think right at the end, Spayhawk said that they would lend us money at no interest to be paid back. And I think they borrowed some money someplace else, which was fairly rapidly paid off. So the debts, I think the total, I don't know what the total debt was, but it wasn't excessive. And I think that was paid off fairly rapidly.
What sort of person then was Annie Keane? What background did she have? She was such a good fundraiser.
Well, she was a financier. I mean, I think she worked for a building society, bank. She came from the north of England, came from Bradford. Yeah. Wonderful, very, very warm lady, and a wonderful lady too. In fact, there's some great pictures of her in the archive. She was an absolute shoo-in for shows like Lock Up Your Daughters, you know, belting out songs like "Come and Ravish Me," stuff like this.
But anyway, she was a formidable woman. Who else was involved in that?
Sheila Cracknell was another person too.
Again, I've heard that name.
Yeah, she was the treasurer of the society, and
Who was the chairman this time?
The chairman was John Shepherd.
John Shepherd.
Yeah, he was quietly.
Still,
John was a quiet, reserved person.
I knew him.
And he was leading it, you know.
Right.
As I say, the key figures. Well, everybody was a key figure, to be honest. Everybody was a key figure.
Yeah.
Because when you read the archive, you see who did this, who did that. People came up with all sorts of ideas. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Peter Richards earlier.
Yeah.
Peter Richards and his wife had joined in 1970. And he was one of the leading actors all through the 1970s.
Right.
And when they were doing the restoration of the theatre, they'd more or less said, well, we can't do any productions, but we will do the summer shows.
Right.
They kept up the summer shows, which, of course, by this time were in Marble Hill House.
Yep.
But Peter Richards came with this wonderful idea. He said, look, we can kill two birds with one stone here. These people are actors. They want to be able to do things.
Yeah.
And he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll go and see if I can organize some pub theatre. And he said, we might even be able to raise some money as well. And he trawled around the pubs and he came up with the Britannia, which is in Brewers Lane, just leading off Richmond Green.
Right.
And the landlord there was very keen. He had a big upper room.
Yeah.
And he was delighted to let the society have the upper room at weekends.
Yeah.
And I think for 2 months, they put on something like 8 one-act plays in that upper room at the weekends. Of course, the landlord, the audiences were turning up. That room was packed with people.
Landlord happy.
And they were paying. Yeah. The landlord was happy. He was flogging drinks.
Yeah.
So money was made in that way. Mm-hmm. But also, in fact, the pub theatre actually was the inspiration for what became lunchtime theatre.
Yeah, I remember lunchtime theatre.
Lunchtime theatre got started. Yeah. It's fallen by the wayside, and it needs. I was going to say it would be great to pick up lunchtime theatre again.
Don't forget, my last section is how you would like to see the future.
Okay.
But no, well, so what I want to know is sort of the facts of this. Start to finish, how long did it take from the moment we identified this place as our potential new home to the door opening and somebody standing on the stage saying,
okay,
"Oh, from Use a Fire"?
We got into the place by 1979.
Okay.
All the work had started being done in 1979.
Being done?
Well, the work began.
Right. Okay.
The work began even before the work began even before the lease had been issued, because Simon Walters very kindly said, okay, well, it'll take 6 months or something, you know, the planning permission, all the rest of it.
Sure.
And Simon said, well, you know, we want to get started. And they fixed it, that we could actually start doing things in advance of getting the actual formal lease.
So you had sort of, I don't know, all these members, young and old, being corralled into doing different
jobs. Oh yeah,
and
they had roster.
So it's not exactly the easiest place for access, is it? I mean,
no.
Down here
they had a roster. They had the weekend rosters. People would come in and work. You know, I've seen copies of the rosters.
Right.
The names that you recognise: Simon Bargate, David King, people like this.
Down here lugging rubbish away.
Just basically, you know, getting rid of rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
So the first things done on stage here was a thing called Opening Gambits.
Sounds appropriate.
Which was towards, I think, the back end of 1980, I guess.
Yeah.
Back end of 1980, I think. And it was a miscellany of things.
Yeah. So you're saying it took a year, start to finish? I thought it was.
Oh, no. The whole thing. Yeah. The whole thing was real. It took probably almost 3 years.
Yeah, I thought so.
Started late 79, mid 1979, late 79, and the whole thing was really finished. You know, the last thing done, of course, was the bar foyer area.
Shame.
Although, in fact, the first production, well, I say the first production, these stage things were being done.
Yeah.
And some of the pub theatre plays were done in here. Mm-hmm. The first major production in here was Richard III, which was actually in the autumn of 1981. That was the first major production done on stage here.
So that sort of takes us 80s and onwards. And I think you were telling me that this is around about not quite as far as you've got. How far have you got in the history?
Well, I've actually got in writing it. I've got as far as the early 1980s. In fact, this evening before you arrived, I've lifted a couple of more volumes of the archive to take home with me tonight to work on through the 1980s, because in some respects, I joined in 1985, so there's a lot of stuff, you know, that I will remember, and there are lots of people around who I can talk to. But I think, you know, I did say right at the, if you forgive me, I did say at the beginning that. You know, the important thing about the RSS are the people. Indeed, not just the actors. I mean, we've already given the tribute to Rita, but it's all the people who work around the stage. Rita was someone who gave a tremendous amount of time to the administration. But someone else who I revere, actually, is Paul Nicholson. And I always say, there would never be a summer show without Paul Nicholson. And in fact, I decided there would be a chapter of the book, and it is written actually, called "Organising a Summer Show." And I invited Paul to write it, and he did. He was very prompt, you know, Paul, very prompt, lots of photographs, everything, very interesting. So really, all I had to do there was basically edit what he'd written, and he said, "Yeah, you can play it," but I haven't changed the sense of anything that he wrote, and it's really the inside story of how summer shows are put on, and I'll tell you, it's an absolute textbook for anybody who wants to take over a summer show.
Because I'm looking around here, and I'm quite interested in techie stuff myself, as you're probably aware. This is one dickens of an undertaking, all very well to take the rubbish out and that kind of thing, but you sort of see speakers here, and back there, the wire and the cable and the lighting, that kind of thing. Obviously, Paul's been around a fair while. Are there any sort of guys and girls that were sort of the technical specialists back in the day?
Well, I mean, somebody I remember who only died a year ago was Martin
Pope.
Martin Pope.
Yep.
Who was a very fine sound man, actually. He'd been an sound engineer with the BBC.
And he'd been here a long time.
And he and Paul actually joined about the same time. Apparently their wives saw an advert in the Richmond and Tickenham Times saying, calling, "We want technical help for a summer show."
Yeah.
And the pair of them joined. That's when Paul tells me, that's when they actually joined to help out on a summer show, technically.
Yeah.
Way back in the 70s.
Okay. Because I just think that the undertaking, the building of this, was this something that the Speyhawk people did, or is it
I think certainly, yeah. I think the intention initially was to have a gallery for an audience up there.
Yeah.
What I'm not sure of, to be honest, I'm not sure at what point somebody said, no, let's turn that into a technical area.
And do you remember when this was flat?
I don't remember it being on the. Well, I do, because I remember a production. I think it was
It was certainly your time, because it was my time.
I think we did an Antony and Cleopatra here in the round.
My first show.
I think we showed. I think that was done in the round.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And we tore up all the seats.
We did, yeah.
Put them on the stage.
We did, yeah. And I think I think Timon of Athens was done like that too.
Don't know.
I wasn't in that. I only watched that.
Okay, so that's this. Do you know members of the bar committee that have populated the theatre down the years? Very important, the bar area, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
How do we still? Have we always had a bar? Have we?
Yes.
Is it absolutely front and centre of the policy of the founding fathers?
Yeah,
the bar. Or?
Yeah. Despite the temperance,
yeah,
leaning of this place to begin with. Yeah, I mean, in what must have been like a cowshed.
Yeah.
They had a bar,
right.
So they had a bar there for the first show. I don't know who ran it,
mm-hmm.
And of course, over the years, many people have, and there are people who've chaired and been secretary of the bar, and people who order the booze. But then the bar has its own.
Because there was a guy. Can you remember the guys? There was a guy when I was first here for maybe 5, maybe more years, who was the head of the bar committee.
Can you remember him?
The name Burney is in my head, but I could be wrong.
Oh, Tom Burney.
Tom Burney.
Tom Burney, yeah.
Have I got that right?
Yeah, Tom Burney. In fact, I've not had a chance to mention many of the great acting names. One of them is Gladys Burney. Tom Burney's
wife? Sister?
Tom Burney's wife, yeah.
Right, okay. She
joined as an actor about in the late 1960s, and she was a leading actress at the time. So she is one great name I cover.
Yeah.
Another person, I think one of the greatest, to my mind anyway, one of the most outstanding artistic people that the RSS ever had, and there will be many people who remember him, is John Grimsey.
Yeah.
John Grimsey was incredible. John Grimsey, do you remember John?
I do.
Yeah, you did. Well, he joined.
He was in Hamlet with me.
Yeah, okay. He joined the RSS. Many of these people came out of Lloyd's Bank. You know, they were all bankers.
I'm sure they were.
John Shepherd, a whole lot of them. John Beardmore, another great person. He was a banker.
I know that name. Yeah.
But John Grimsey was also came out of banking.
Right.
And he found his way down here, and he rapidly established himself as a director with immense imagination.
Yeah.
A very, very good director, very exacting director as well. Must have been quite difficult. Well, I did work with him once actually. A very brilliant actor. He'd been trained in choreography, believe it or not. At one time in the 1930s, the banks paid people to go and do extramural things. Yeah. And Lloyd's Bank actually paid for a course of lessons for John Grimsey to do ballet dancing. So he brought those skills and choreography. In fact, one thing that amuses me, there's one thing he could do. He could do many, many things. There's one thing he couldn't do. And once on a show, he had to play the part of Feste.
Right. Very difficult part, as I recall.
Very difficult part, as you recall. And the reviewer was talking about John. And more or less said, well, there's one thing he can't do. He can't sing. But John Grimsey is, I think, one of the great artists. Okay. And there were great actors. Mary Wallace, of course, made her name. Yeah. Great actress with the society.
Yeah. And so you did mention earlier, maybe a little bit too briefly, in that the club's named after her. Why was it named after her again? Just
I think Mary Wallace had this tremendous reputation as an actress. I mean, I don't remember as an actress, though. There are many people who will remember. Yeah. Now, Mary was really a singer, and she'd been with I think the Tudor Players, they were called. They were basically a light opera group.
Right.
And one of the summer shows, I think, well, I'm not sure whether it was the Henry VIII they did or Julius Caesar. And because they wanted a lot of crowd,
Mhm.
which you did need for, and it certainly needed for Julius Caesar, and the RSS borrowed a bunch of people from the Tudor players who wanted to come and throw their sweaty caps in the air, you know, as it says in the play. And one of these people was Mary Wallace. She just turned up to be in the crowd. And though she had been on stage as an actress, I think wasn't not with the RSS, she decided to join. And she very rapidly showed what a great actress she was. And of course, the other thing is that she was remarkable in many other ways. I think twice a leading actress fell ill virtually as the show was about to open. And Mary went on with the book. She did it at Minack.
Yeah.
She did it in a show at Minack. And she'd only been told the day she got down, you know, oh, so-and-so's fallen sick.
Yeah.
Will you go on? And she didn't know the moves.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never done Falstaff before, but I'll have a go.
but she actually it was Labour's loss. I mean, but it was the Princess of France or one of those things. You know?
Right.
Yeah, it was a big female role, and she did it.
Yeah.
But of course, if it was the Princess of France, she certainly had the stature, the voice. Not that I remember the voice, deep contralto voice,
Yeah.
to be able to do it. She was a great actress. I think the reason the theatre is named after is that you know, the society was clearly very, very effective when she died in 1977 of cancer. It was a relatively short illness, I think. It was diagnosed in the March, and she was dead by late summer.
Goodness.
So it all happened very quickly, and there's no doubt that. And she was also the secretary of the society for a long time. For a long time.
Yeah.
So she was an absolute key member as part of, as well as being a brilliant actor. Never actually directed or anything like that.
Yeah.
But she was a wonderful actress, and the very last major production she did was What the Butler Saw. She played the nymphomaniac wife in What the Butler Saw, but that wasn't the last play she was in.
Okay.
The very last play she was in, major production, was Julius Caesar, and I think the very first thing she was in was a summer show as a crowd member in Julius Caesar, throwing up her sweaty cap.
So there is a circularity.
But I think, and the fact that she was devoted, the Thames Television were giving money, but in fact they only said they would offer money when Simon Walter said we are going to name the new theatre after Mary Wallace.
Yeah. To the present day, then, I know this is not something you've yet covered, but I know that you wanted to talk about the youth group.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted to talk about this rather odd year that we've been having.
Yeah.
And my last question to you was, what consequences do you see from the experience we're going through now for the future, and what would you like to see come to the club, new for the club that we haven't covered so far?
I want a chapter in the book called Reflections, which is looking forward. And I think I've murmured once to him, but I would be murmuring it louder at the time. I would like someone like Francis Abbott to write that chapter, because he is the chairman, and he will have a vision. And I think I would like to see what he would say. What I would say about the particular situation now is that having studied the history, I've seen how the society went through periods when they couldn't act, they couldn't find spaces to act, but they all held together. And so I think one of the key things about drama groups, probably all sorts of groups, but I can only speak of my own experience, drama groups, is the companionship. I think we've always got to remember at the end of the day, what is so important about a drama group is the companionship, what the Australians call mateship. If you're an Australian cricketer, you talk about mateship these days. Companionship within the society. And one of the great things about drama groups, and I really am borrowing this idea from John Crook, all sorts of people come to drama groups, misfits, or some people who might have difficulties fitting in anywhere else, they come to the RSS, places like the RSS, and they find a home. Maybe I'm a misfit, I don't know, but I think that is the companionship is one thing. Now, I think that when we look at the current crisis, in a way where we could come out of this really well. I feel really sorry. I'm really worried about professional theatre. It ain't going to be too easy for them to get back up and running again unless something happens soon. But as far as we're concerned, this theatre is not going to fall down. We've got a good bank balance. The members are still here. And what I find most inspiring, and I won't see it from the outside, is all the little activities that are going on. All the Zooming. I never even heard of Zoom before. All the Zooming, the play readings, things like this, for example. And then, of course, great, on Sunday, when the weather is going to be good, incidentally.
Okay.
Lovely, perfect day on Sunday for those who are performing at Marble Hill. Temperature 22, 23, part sun, part cloud, perfect for the audience, perfect for the. So
I'm better look at, haven't I?
Yes,
weatherman you are.
So you know, I think it's great that we find ourselves in a position to get out in the outdoors and do something, and hopefully we'll be entertaining ourselves, but hopefully there'll be people in the park who'll say, "Oh, what's going on here?" Much as they did in those very early shows in the 1930s, the strollers who say, "This is interesting. Who's doing this?" And I guess those of us in the audience will have to be ready to say to people, "Well, actually, this is the Richmond Shakespeare Society," and give a quick spiel or something like that, or hand out the little leaflets of the kind of things that we do. I think we should be ready to do that on Sunday. And I hope that there are other things we can do. It's going to be very difficult to get back in our little theatre here, because it's a very tight space. And as long as, you know, the 1 metre rule or the 2 metre rule persists, we ain't going to get too many people in. I've discussed this with Paul Nicholson, in fact. And he says that you probably get 18 people in here if you obey all the rules. And we said, well, there must be other places. And Paul had just been redoing the sound system in St. Mary's Church. And I said, we could use St. Mary's Church if they would let us. If they would let us.
Yeah.
And Paul, even before my saying this, said, I've worked out how many you could get in there. And it was something like 100. So I don't know. I mean, there are other places we could perhaps use. I think that we've got to find ways now of getting people together, performing together, not just on Zoom. It's a way that Peter Richards, you know, in 1980 said, we've got to get people doing things, and he started his pub theatre at the Britannia pub down in Richmond. So I think we've got to use our imaginations and perhaps be a little bit bold, a little bit cheeky, and see where else we might be able to perform. We've still got a bit of the summer left. If we get a good late autumn, we might be able to do more stuff, you know, out on the greensward or whatever. So I feel pretty hopeful about for the RSS. I think that, as I say, we're not about to collapse, and we've kept our members together by these interesting means, and we just got to start gently expanding on things.
Pete, it's been an enormous pleasure and honour to chat to you tonight. You really needed to cheer me up. I just look at you and I feel more cheerful. So thank you very much. I could have asked you a million more questions. I hope that for everybody watching, I prompted Pete enough to chat away and give us a really interesting insight into a lot of the history of this club that so many of us hold so dear. And thank you very much for zooming in and watching. And here's to the next however many years that is, 1934.
Yeah, and wait for the book. It's going to happen. Even if I have to self-publish, it will happen. I'm not going to go through agents or editors or anything like that. It will happen. This book will be published, even if I have to pay for it myself. And the proceeds will go to the society. It will be, I will say, I find it difficult to write in a way because, as you know, I've done writing plays and stuff like this. It's writing of the imagination. This is a different kind of writing for me. I know that I'm actually writing what is essentially a reference. It comes to life when I talk about people. It comes to life too when I'm talking about types of plays that are being produced. You know, some of the experimental theatre in the 1960s and so on and so forth. People's attitudes towards Shakespeare. You know, the purists who say you shouldn't muck around with Shakespeare, and those who say, oh, it doesn't matter if we have a female Hamlet or a female Richard II and so on. Big debate around that. And I do touch on these kind of things as well. It's allowed me to sort of be a bit self-indulgent. But I hope that what I do is, and I am getting help on it. You know, no question. I've got a lot of help from Simon Walters, people like Peter Richards, who lives down.
Referenced Eloise, didn't you?
Eloise is going to. I want Eloise to do a lot of work on the plague year, what I call the plague year, and last year as well, because she's been far more in contact with what goes on. Mm. But I've got to be careful because she's a very busy lady. She's a school teacher now, and all the rest of it. And she's now going to be involved with the youth theatre as well. But yeah, I haven't mentioned Eloise yet. In fact, I really have been very careful about mentioning current names, because the great fear is you can't mention everybody. So sometimes it's best to mention nobody, except those who are dead.
It does not include Simon Walters at Simon Going to Press. Pete, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for tuning in.